Welcome back to the Clara CFO Group channel. We have officially entered budgeting season, and with that, I want to make sure that I'm equipping you guys with a lot of information to help you through your budgeting process. I call budgeting season Q4 of any year, and sometimes people will start the budgets a little bit earlier, and sometimes they won't do it until after the new year starts. But I highly encourage you to think through this process in Q4 or whenever your fiscal year is. So most of us are going to start our fiscal year in January and end it in December. So Q4 in our situation would be October, November, and December. This is a really great time to think strategically about the coming year and also put together your financial plan. So if that sounds good, please stay tuned. And if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, I would invite you to subscribe to the channel and also check out our sister channel, the new Financial Clarity podcast channel. You can check that out as well. We have a new podcast that's available on all the podcast platforms, and it is called Financial Clarity, because that's what we like to do here. We will have a couple clips from the podcast here available on this channel, but mostly those conversations are a good bit longer and we get more in depth into things. So we're going to keep those on a separate channel so you can opt into those if you would like. And then we will keep this channel to have a little bit shorter videos and more informative stuff, do software walkthroughs, we'll talk about all sorts of things finance, kind of what we have been doing in the past. And we want to keep doing that on this channel. We just want to offer you guys another potential resource that can help you in your small business through the podcast. All right, so if that sounds good, you can go check that out. And let's talk about budgeting, because that's what this video is about. So really, budgeting Q4, it's a really good time to do it, but I think it's important to maybe think about why would we budget? You know, I know I've talked to tons of business owners as I've been providing CFO services, and one of the questions we have in any of our intake or our discovery conversations is, do you have a budget? And then the second follow-up question is, if you do have it, do you use it? And, you know, a lot of times most people don't have it. And this is, I mean, keep in mind, these are businesses that are, you know, 7, 8-figure businesses sometimes don't always have a budget. So if you don't have one, don't feel bad. It doesn't mean that, you know, you can't get started with a budgeting process or anything like that. And then the second part of that is, do you use the budget? Because sometimes people have a budget, but it's just kind of a process that they do and then they never look at it. So that's not what we want. The reason we have a budget is so that we can put together a realistic financial plan of the future 12 months, okay? And I like to budget for the future 12 months. Some people might do longer term budgets, but budgets are really, they start to get really loose the further you go out into the future, because you know, there's a lot of costs you can't necessarily predict. We would kind of do forecasting a little bit more looser for much longer than a year, but really a budget, we wouldn't want to go out much more than like the future year, okay? We budget so that we can have a plan, and also that like the business, the way that it's been running, that we can see if it's financially going to work, okay? And then we can kind of understand like, okay, well, if we're not hitting our profitability goals, we need to make some tweaks on maybe this line item of expenses, or we need to look into payroll and see where we can save some money, or we need to figure out how to get our supplies for a little bit cheaper. You know, you can start to make decisions ahead of time before you get to a month and you're like, wow, I don't have any money. I don't understand what's going on. That's why we budget, so we can think about things before they become a problem. What is a budget really practically? So a budget is going to look like your profit and loss statement for the most part, but it's going to look like the future months, okay? So if we're in September right now, so we might take our financials from January through September and then project out, you know, through December of the next year. And so that would really look like we're gonna put it's just gonna probably look like a spreadsheet, you guys, unless you're using a software like QuickBooks or Giraffe or, you know, other types of budgeting software. I'm going to walk through actually those in future videos that show you how to create a budget in QuickBooks, how to do a budget in Excel. And if you want to, I can even do how to do a budget in Giraffe, but I haven't dabbled in Giraffe on this channel just yet. We use it internally, but it's something that I'm thinking about for the future. So let me know if you're interested in Giraffe in the comment section below. A budget is really gonna look like a set of numbers for the future. So whatever your revenue was in the past, you're going to project what you think and put in the budget what you need to make your sales in the future. Whatever you've been spending in the past on payroll, you're gonna put that in of what you think you're gonna be spending in the future for payroll. And you're literally gonna go line by line through your profit and loss statement and plan. So the deliverable when you're done with the budgeting process should look like kind of a spreadsheet or some type of financial plan for the next 12 months where you can kind of see what are sales, what does profit look like, what do the expenses look like, and you need to see all of that. Sometimes people confuse goals with a budget. You know, hey, we want to make $1 million and we only want to spend $800,000, and that means we're going to have a 20% profit margin and we're going to make $200,000. That's great, but you need to break down, where are you spending that $800,000? How are you, like, where is that $1 million coming from? And that's why it makes more sense to kind of break it down into, like, realistically, what are we going to take in January? What are we going to spend in January? What are we going to take in February? What are we going to spend in February? And you can break that out across the future months. Okay, so then you can see, is that goal really realistic? Okay, how do we use a budget? So a budget is to be used to help guide decision making. It's kind of, the budgeting process happens like once a year at the beginning of the year, but you should be kind of paying attention to it throughout the year. You should be able to say, okay, you know, I want to do this thing with my employees. They're asking to get trained on this one potential software tool, for example, and maybe that's a training they have to go somewhere for. You can look in your budget and say, okay, do we have enough in the budget for this training? Maybe you had like a blanket budget because you know you're always going to trainings and things like that. Or maybe this wasn't planned for and you need to think, okay, well, where can I pull some money from? Because maybe sales have been slower than expected, and then you need to make sure that you're not overspending on these sort of ad hoc decisions that come up throughout the year. And so the budget can kind of keep you in line a little bit. Think about if you're using a budget well, it should be kind of a little bit like the bumpers on, like if you go bowling and you put the bumpers in, it should kind of be able to sort of keep you from going too far off one way or the other. Now, that's if you're religiously using your budget like that. You can be like, okay, well, we didn't bring in what we thought on revenue, so we actually have to cut some expenses here or there. Or maybe if you are bringing in enough on the revenue side, then that gives you a little bit of extra wiggle room on the expense side to make sure you're still hitting your profit targets. So that's kind of like practically using a budget. When a decision comes in, you need to refer to the budget to say, like, can we afford it? Or, you know, is this something that we need to pull from another category? Or is this something that we need to wait on? Maybe it's just a matter of maybe not yet is sometimes the answer when we're looking at our budget and making decisions. A lot of times it's like, that might be something we really want to invest in, but let's not invest yet. Let's actually wait 2 or 3 months to see if some of our other things are actually going to materialize before we make that decision. And I think another nice thing about a budget is that it can also be the bad guy in a situation. Sometimes people like to have a scapegoat when they have to say no to something. So having a really firm budget can actually give you a very clear answer to say, no, it's not in the budget. We can't do that this year. Okay. So when you actually have your financial plan, you can actually have something to point to say, yeah, we can't do that right now, rather than just, saying for whatever other reasons you can't do it. You don't want to be disappointing your employees, but it is nice to kind of have a collective reason that if everybody is trying to abide by a budget, then, everybody needs to abide by the budget. So that can be a helpful little piece of a budget as well. So let's talk a little bit about how you would go about creating a budget. So you would definitely want to find your prior financials. So your past 12 months or past year and a half of profit and loss information. And then it is good to have a balance sheet on hand too, just to be able to look to see if there's anything else you need to put on the budget that might show up on the balance sheet. Like I'm thinking specifically if you need to buy some additional equipment and you need to plan for whether or not that's going to be an asset or if it's going to be an expense, you can put that into the budget. I like to always, when I'm pulling the financials, I always like to have a balance sheet available, but really your profit and loss is going to be the thing that you're going to lean on the most. Your balance sheet is going to come in a little bit more when it comes to cash flow forecasting and planning for cash flow, but I like to have both of them just as a reference point if you need to check out your balance sheet while you're going through the process. Another thing that you're going to need is any kind of sales projections. So if you are just gonna say, hey, we're gonna grow 10% over last year. That's okay, that's one way to do it. But if you have anything that's a little bit more dialed in, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more tailored to actually what's happening in the business in January, what's happening in the business in February, what's happening in March, what targets do we have for those months, that can be really helpful because sales are always the hardest to budget for. And so if you are doing that work ahead of time and really planning your sales thoughtfully, you're going to want to put that into your overall budget. You don't necessarily want to put your like pie in the sky, like stretch goals into your budget, because I would make sure that you have a conservative sales number that you believe you can actually hit. Don't put those big stretch goals because you don't want to be making decisions on like really kind of lofty sales targets. Okay. So I would always say make your budget a little bit more conservative. And that way, if you do really hit those stretch goals and whatnot, that just gives you a lot of extra room to be able to, maybe invest more or, make some of those decisions, make some additional investments throughout the year. But I would not put, your most enthusiastic salesperson that they think they can sell to everybody in the world, like don't necessarily use their sales projections. Like make sure that you're taking them down into reality and also really like what is very achievable. Those numbers should be going into the budget. The next thing I would consider when you're planning your budget is your strategic plan for the next year. So if let's say that you really want to be investing in marketing this coming year, and maybe you're going to be redoing your website, or maybe you have a big new software implementation, things like that are kind of more strategic things that you're trying to do and improve the business overall. Make sure you consider those things in your future plan and in your budget, because the prior year may not have those expenses to look at. So a lot of our prior year expenses are going to be like, yeah, a lot of that stuff is continuing into this year. But your strategic plan is probably going to include some things that you've never had in the budget or never had in your financials before. So you need to think about, okay, like what is the cost of that website redesign? What's the cost of that new software implementation? Do we need to hire consultants to help us do that software implementation? Do we need new equipment? There's lots of questions that might need to be asked in order to put the numbers to kind of those strategic initiatives, if you will. And then another thing to think about is that if you have really large teams, you might try to do some departmental budgeting. So maybe certain departments might be in charge of certain line items on the P&L. So they might have individual budgets that need to roll up into kind of your master budget as well. So there's some things to think about as you're pulling together your budget for the coming year. Another question that I get a lot is just like, how do we use it? And then how do we report on the budget and our progress? So there's a report called the budget versus actual. You've probably seen that before. And you would try to get your budget into some sort of system. So ideally it would be in a system like QuickBooks or Giraffe or some other, I'm not sure if Xero has a place to put in a budget. I think they do. I'm not totally sure. I don't use Xero very much, to be honest. But if you have a system that you can input your budget into, it's very easy to run a budget versus actual off of those systems. If you don't, you can run a budget versus actual just through Excel. You can use some formulas and things like that to make it a little bit easier. Sometimes it's a lot more manual to do it that way, but there are ways to do budget versus actual. So that's one of the best things you can do if you have a budget is to look at your budget versus actual every single month. Your budget versus actual is going to reveal to you whatever you thought was going to happen, were your assumptions correct? And it's going to reveal if you're just, doing things left and right and you're not really consulting your budget at all. It's going to make you kind of bring to light very quickly when you start to see those variances. So it would have your actual minus your budget and then the difference, and then you can even do a percentage difference. So you can see like, well, how far off were we? So I would highly recommend doing a budget versus actual review every single month. When we do this with our clients, we make notes about like, why was each item off? So revenue targets were off because we didn't get that client that we thought we were going to get, or maybe clients weren't, coming on at the pace that we thought they were going to, or maybe with since we didn't spend as much on, or didn't get as much revenue, maybe we save a little bit on payroll. So we can kind of look at some of the correlations in when something doesn't happen, it's probably gonna affect something else in the P&L as well. So it's a really great way to really analyze what's happening in the business. What do we need to plan for differently? Do we need to revise like our rolling forecast, which we're gonna talk about rolling forecasts too. So stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. All of these things, like you can really see like what were my assumptions correct? Yes or no? What do I need to plan for differently in the future? And it's really just like a really great feedback tool to have that budget versus actual reporting. Okay, so that's kind of high level budgeting 101. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Please let me know if you have any budgeting questions in the comment section below. I am going to be talking a lot about budgeting over the next couple months. I know a lot of you have been requesting budgeting videos. I've seen many a comment, and I don't know why I haven't done very many. I do have a training available, a full like hour and a half, I believe, training. I call it profit planning. So that is available if you want to check that out. But we're going to be talking about a lot of budgeting over the next couple months. So definitely make sure you're tuned in to the channel and watch out for our weekly videos. All right, well, thank you guys so much for being here. If this was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It would help me and help the channel, and let me know if this is a helpful video for you. So thank you so much for being here. Talk to you guys later.